Work and learn. Meet Light Meet Max සක්‍රිය කර ගැනීමට MySLT app එකට log වෙන්න. Work and learn. Meet Light Meet Max සක්‍රිය කර ගැනීමට MySLT app එකට log වෙන්න.
නව Close Up Triple Fresh Formula. මුව මනාව පිරිසිදු කරමින් විෂ බීජ වලට එරෙහිව සටන් කරයි. මුවට දැනෙන සිසිලක් එක් කරයි. තවත් විශ්වාසයෙන් ලං වෙන්න. නව Close Up Triple Fresh Formula.
On First at 9 tonight, this Wednesday, the 2nd of November 2022. Against government inaction. Tense situation during mass protest staged by trade union together with opposition-led political parties in Colombo. But Colombo-based businesses reiterate not to tarnish Sri Lanka's image internationally. Coordinated effort. China-based UN representative calls for unified effort to revive Sri Lanka's tourism and investments through China. New approach. Former Speaker Karu Jayasuriya says competitive business model in maritime industry necessary to attract investors.
The current government has a massive responsibility and must change the traditional thinking.
Maritime security. Sri Lanka inducts second largest maritime warship since 2018.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9 with Andrew Bernard. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Very good evening and welcome to AdaDerana 24's English News. I'm Andrew Bernard. In a top story for tonight, Minister of Ports and Shipping Nimal Siripal de Silva expresses confidence that the government will be able to transform Sri Lanka into a maritime hub despite the level of challenges the country is facing at the moment. He made these remarks while addressing the Colombo International Maritime and Logistics Conference today. Addressing the same event, former Speaker Karu Jayasuriya said Sri Lanka should create a competitive business model to attract investments to the maritime industry and therefore should be more investor-friendly.
The Colombo International Maritime and Logistics Conference 2022, which is one of the major on-shipping industry conferences in Sri Lanka and South Asia after the COVID-19 pandemic, began in Colombo this morning.
At the Port of Colombo, we are looking at retaining our existing shipping lines. Given the current challenges, we find with the rationalizing of trade routes and the capacities coming in, the vessel deployments, the shipping lines are looking at having lesser hubs, lesser port calls, but with bigger volume, hopefully. We need to ensure that we are on that map. So how do we plan to keep our market shares, keep our volume, keep our customers? Number one, of course, reducing costs. There are many forms of reducing costs. Simplifying our processes, one-stop shop, system automation. We're also bringing in a thing called a truck booking system for import containers. With Adani building their terminal, we understand that the number of trucks coming into the port is going to increase. So how do we become more efficient or more productive and reduce the traffic, maybe streamline it, use our resources more effectively? We're bringing in a system where the importer will book online an actual appointment, which will be real-time updated to each terminal individually. At the terminal, we'll be able to preempt the resource requirements and allocation for waterfront and yard operations. It'll also make sure lesser waiting time for our customers, i.e. ease of doing business. The port will look at now diversifying out, looking at bringing value-added services like a logistics hub, warehousing, value additions. One of our key strategies will be to exploit our current markets and move into new markets. For example, we want to regain our status in the East Africa market, the Gulf.
Port of Colombo has already started its development plan to have 14 million capacity in another 4 years time period by starting the development of JCT1 project, East Container Terminal Phase 2 and the West Container Terminal. Total completion of the entire ECT is planned for January 2025. Further, the WCT operation for 600 meters is planned for 2025 and the total operation is planned for 2027. In 2026, Port of Colombo is ready with 14 million TEU capacity.
We are partnering with Sinopec, which is a leading bunker player, and also the investment USD 1.1 million, and there were some delays getting the approvals. Also now, what we are looking looking at relaxing some regulation to enhance our bunkering business in Hambantota. Since we are very close to the main shipping route, we can provide different type of activities like provision supply, crew changes, vehicles coming out of Japan and bound to East Africa. So currently they are not calling Hambantota or Sri Lanka, but we are trying to attract this market. How we are going to attract this? By giving value additions in Hambantota. So we will be having a repair workshop within the port, and all type of services which required for the vessels we can facilitate in Hambantota. So instead of calling Dubai, they can come to Hambantota and do the same thing. Another segment is warehousing and logistics. So the first warehouse is local investment. It's about $2 million in US dollars. So basically we are catering this for fertilizer cargo. So Hambantota is going to start fertilizer storing and distributing. So not only to the local consumption, also the regional markets.
Government should take their hands off of doing business. Government should be a facilitator, a regulator, a provider of logistics, and allow the private sector to compete. That's how all the countries have developed. The more you hold on to this, the more difficult for you to get these transformations done. In our country, minister changes, elections comes, you need to give jobs, and they pack the government public service from 600,000 in 1994 to 1.5 million now. 90% of our tax revenue goes for pensions, salaries, and samurdhi. So how to run a country.
We are located next to the massive emerging market of India and adjacent to the east-west shipping lane. So it is in our hands to transform the location with global giants in the industry. Unless we create a very competitive and open business model to attract investment, we must ask ourselves, why should global shipping giants and logistic companies come to Sri Lanka when our competitors who are already well established and are giving more freedom for business and opportunities in those countries? We need to be business friendly and investor friendly than ever before under the current circumstances. The current government has a massive responsibility and must change the traditional thinking if we are to move forward to establish a global hub.
In the port of Colombo, the bunkering facility is very much limited. When I took over this ministry, I thought it must be expanded. Now we have called for a very transparent expression of interest to bring more bunker fuel to Sri Lanka. In the same time, we are developing Trincomalee port, and in Gaul, we want to make it a tourist port, marina, hub, and we have already called for expression of interest. There are few foreign investors who are interested, and I think my secretary and them are very busy in evaluating their proposals. We are confident that with all the negative factors which are there, we'll be able to make Sri Lanka the maritime hub.
Now, UN Resident Coordinator for China, Siddhartha Chatterjee, has proposed to convene a meeting to promote Sri Lanka tourism and investment in China, together with the heads of UN agencies and a host of other agencies. During a recent discussion with the Sri Lankan envoy in China, Dr. Palitha Kohona, the representative in China also emphasized on the need to enhance technical and vocational education to prepare the youth in the country to face challenges of the digital world. The UN Resident Coordinator in China, Siddhartha Chatterjee, met with the Sri Lankan ambassador to China, Dr. Palitha Kohona, at the Sri Lankan embassy in China recently, where they discussed ways and means of enhancing UN collaboration with Sri Lanka as the country strives to realize the sustainable development goals despite the COVID and financial crises. Ambassador Kohona appraised the UN representative on the post-COVID recovery plan of Sri Lanka and emphasized the need to work closely with the UN to benefit from its vast experience in areas such as agriculture, renewable energy, social infrastructure, education, SMEs, tourism and disaster management. Referring to the Colombo Declaration on Youth, he highlighted the need to make youth concerns part of the decision-making process. The UN Resident Coordinator has replied that Sri Lanka, as a country where the literacy rate stands at more than 92%, needs to pay more attention to technical and vocational education to make youth better prepared to face the challenges of the fast digitalizing future world. The ambassador suggested bringing the UN and Sri Lanka closer to enhance collaboration and thus bringing more tangible benefits to the people of Sri Lanka in the post-pandemic era. He emphasized the importance of reviving tourism as tourism-related returns are immediate in generating foreign exchange. As such, Chatterjee proposed a discussion with parties including the embassy, UN Resident Coordinator in Sri Lanka Hannah Singer, heads of other UN agencies, the China International Development Cooperation Agency, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Ministry of Tourism of Sri Lanka, Chinese tour operators and other public and private stakeholders. The Sri Lankan ambassador has endorsed the suggestion to make a strategic plan through a collaborative process to revive Sri Lanka's tourism, especially through wider promotion, investments in infrastructure development and training. Now, protests launched by trade unions and political parties in Maradana today became tense after the protesters attempted to force their way beyond a line of police officers. Now, leader of the Samagi Janabalawegaya, Sajith Premadasa, and many other leaders were part of the protest. A protest was carried out today by the trade unions and main opposition-led political parties against the government and the pressures of the economic crisis. They gathered at the Elphinstone Theatre at 3:30 p.m. Members of political parties, including leader of the SJB, Sajith Premadasa, a group including its secretary of the Sri Lanka Freedom Party, General Secretary Dayasiri Jayasekara, and the leader of the 43rd Brigade, Partly Champika Ranawaka. The protesters first marched their way towards Fort through the Technical Junction. However, a large number of police officers were seen blocking the road ahead that led toward the Colombo Fort from the Technical Junction. Organisers of the protest then tried to stop the protesters from marching on. However, since this attempt failed, they decided to hold a public rally at the location. However, due to the strong opposition from the protesters, the public rally could not be held, and opposition leader Sajith Premadasa left the protest. Later, when the protesters attempted to advance once again, a tense situation arose with the police. Now, business chamber representatives who spoke to AdaDerana today and said that protests and disturbances in the country will have an immediate effect on the tourism industry, putting further pressure on the country's foreign exchange position. Sri Lanka's tourism-related industries and businesses were finally expecting to attract tourists during the winter season. Now, the Colombo-based business chambers also said that any impact on tourism will affect not only business owners, but the entirety of dependents on tourism-related businesses.
We have no objections against anyone who's making peaceful protest. That's of course a human right, and we as chambers, we have no objection to that. But we are very concerned about the present situation of the industries and the businesses in Sri Lanka. They have gone down drastically due to COVID and due to many other conditions prevailed in Sri Lanka. Therefore, we are very concerned. Right now, we believe this is an opportune time for the travel and tourism industry. It is very cheaper for them to come to a country like Sri Lanka and spend their holiday, especially during the winter time. Their cost is high on those areas. We believe after the Easter Sunday attack, the tourist industry has gone down drastically in Sri Lanka. Now again, it is picking up a little with some of the airlines was trying to fly to Sri Lanka, and there is a momentum that some tourists start coming to Sri Lanka. So this is a good time that we should promote and we should help this industry. That is the reason that we do not want to see there are troubles in Sri Lanka, therefore people will not decide a place to travel to Sri Lanka.
Because of such protests, what happens is that international media will show all these things and say these protests shows that Sri Lanka is not still a stable country. The immediate impact is on tourism, because this year we are expecting some recovery in the tourism industry with relative peace in the country. And who are the people affected by this? Not only the people or the hotel owners. You see, there's a string of people who are depending on the hotel industry, starting from the employees, beach helpers, trishaw drivers, vendors who sell batik, souvenir items to foreigners. So there's a whole heap of supply chain that are dependent on tourism. And if tourism has a bad impact, you see all the people without jobs.
Largest charter airline Azur Air and the flag carrier Air France will resume flights to Sri Lanka starting this week. Accordingly, Azur Air will commence flights to Sri Lanka tomorrow, while Air France is scheduled to resume flights on Friday. Meanwhile, talking to Twitter, Tourism Minister Harin Fernando announced that Switzerland's national airline, Swiss International Airlines, will recommence operations to Sri Lanka with weekly flights starting from the 10th of November to May 2023. He said this will further strengthen European arrivals to Sri Lanka for the season. Now stay with us on AdaDerana English as we bring you more news on the second largest wartime vessel donated to Sri Lanka after this short break.
අයිනෝ පුතා හැබැයි යා ගෙදර නිදියන්නෙම අමෝතු තැනක.
කාලගුණය කොහොමුණත් රයිනෝ නං වහලට සේෆ් තමයි මුළු ගෙදරම. Rhino cement roofing sheets. Then you know Rhino. I know.
Big 3.
Welcome back. Now, the US Coast Guard offshore patrol vessel Douglas Munro, which was acquired to the Sri Lankan Navy, was ceremoniously welcomed at the port of Colombo this morning. This is the largest vessel donated to Sri Lanka after 2018. The event was attended by US Ambassador to Sri Lanka Julie Chung, State Minister of Defence Pramitha Bandara Tennakun, Defence Secretary Kamal Gunaratne, Chief of Defence Staff General Shavindra Silva, and commanders of the Tri-Force. The Sri Lankan Navy formally accepted US vessel ex-USCGC Douglas Munro from the US on the 25th of October last year. Following the acquisition, it was designated as P627 attached to the Sri Lanka Navy fleet. The US Coast Guard has previously provided two ships, SLNS Samudra in 2005 and SLNS Gajabahu in 2018, in a bid to strengthen and develop partnerships to overcome common challenges in the maritime domain. The new vessel will be the third US vessel to be handed over to the Sri Lankan Navy. The Sri Lankan Navy will be deploying the vessel to wide-ranging operations that include conservation of maritime resources in the region, as well as search and rescue of naval and fishing communities in distress. From all charges filed against him under the PTA over his alleged close ties with one of the suicide bombers of the Easter Sunday terror attacks, identified as Inshaf Ahmad. Ford Magistrate Tilnagamage made this announcement when the case against MP Baduddin was taken up today. MP Rishad Baduddin was arrested by the Criminal Investigation Department on the 24th of April in 2021 over allegations regarding his involvement and close ties with the terrorists that carried out the Easter Sunday attack in 2019. The CID presented MP Baduddin before the court magistrate on the 10th of August last year and informed the court that he was arrested based on the investigations currently being carried out on the suicide bomber Inshaf Ahmad, who was responsible for carrying out the explosion at the Cinnamon Grand. The CID alleged that MP Rishad Baduddin, during his tenure as the Minister of Industries, had allowed the suicide bomber Inshaf Ahmad, who owned the copper factory Colossus, to export copper beyond the legally allowed limit, earning funds that would later be used to carry out the Easter Sunday terror attack. The Attorney General, while giving instructions regarding the investigation, stated that the charges filed against MP Baduddin under the PTA are not substantiated by the investigations and that the suspect should be released. As such, when the case was taken up before the Fort Magistrate, Tilnagamage ordered the release of MP Badiuddin from all charges filed under the PTA. Now, a Gazette notification was issued stipulating that the maximum retail price should be displayed on 5 goods and products imported into the country. The relevant Gazette notification was issued by the Consumer Affairs Authority yesterday. According to it, it has been announced that a maximum retail price, the name and the registered address of the importer must be clearly displayed in English on the packets or containers of confectionery including chewing gum, chocolates, biscuits, cakes and toilet soap imported to Sri Lanka. Now, the all share price index closed in red as a result of price losses in counters such as Valuable One, Richard Pearce and Company and Sampath Bank, with turnover crossing Rs 1 billion today. A similar benchmark was witnessed in the S&P SL 20 as the index fell by 8.87 points to end at 2,601.73. High net worth and institutional investor participation was noted in Brown's Investment and CT Holdings. Mixed interest was observed in Expo Lanka Holdings, Lanka IOC and John Keel's Holdings, whilst retail interest was noted in SMB Leasing, Tess Agro and LOLC General Insurance. Foreign participation in the market activity meanwhile remained at subdued levels, with foreigners crossing as net buyers. Now, the US Central Bank will announce its latest policy decision on interest rates in the next couple of hours, with the Fed Chair Jerome Powell scheduled to elaborate on the policymakers' thinking. It is widely expected that the Federal Reserve will raise interest rates by 3/4 of a percentage point for the 4th straight time. But it will open the door to a future slowdown in its policy tightening as it balances the risk of stubbornly high inflation against economic strains of credit. The rate hike is expected to be delivered by Federal Reserve shortly, will move the target federal funds rate by 75 basis points higher to a level between 3.75% and 4%. The policy rate has not yet been high since early 2008, and the pace of the Fed's move this year, 375 basis points of tightening after the expected move today, is unmatched since the rate increased former Fed Chair Paul Volcker resorted to it in 1980s. Now, Russia today said it would renew its participation in an agreement allowing Ukraine to export grain via the Black Sea just for 4 days after suspending its role in the deal. Moscow had pulled out at the Ukrainian weekend, saying it could not guarantee the safety of civilian ships crossing the Black Sea because of the drone attack on its fleet there. The defense ministry said in a statement that the Russian Federation considers the quarantines received at the moment appears sufficient and resumes the implementation of the agreement. The U-turn followed a phone call between Russian President Vladimir Putin and Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan, and after consultations between their defense ministers. Even after the call with the Turkish leader, the Kremlin said Moscow would only consider resuming the agreement after a detailed investigation of a drone attack on Saturday against its Black Sea fleet, which it accused Ukraine of carrying out with support from Britain. And that's all the news we have for this evening. Join us again tomorrow at the same time during our primetime news bulletin. Have a pleasant evening. Good night.
For news and information you can trust 24 hours a day, visit AdaDerana.lk.